Welcome back to MSNBC's live coverage of Election Night 2012. Little ray of sunshine tonight for the Republican presidential and vice presidential ticket. Paul Ryan did not have to resign his U.S. House seat in order to run for vice president, and Paul Ryan has been reelected to the House in Wisconsin District 1, defeating his Democratic opponent 56-42. That's with 82% of the vote reporting, but this race is called. Paul Ryan will be returning to the House of Representatives, presumably as the House Republican budget chairman. We are waiting right now, as you see, a very, very fired up crowd right now in Chicago, awaiting a victory speech from President Obama. A lot of people there tonight. We don't know what to expect from this speech, but we know to expect it shortly. In terms of other results tonight, history is being made tonight in some ballot initiatives. Voters in Maryland passed a referendum upholding a law allowing same-sex marriage. In Maryland, that reverses an 0-32 losing streak for same-sex marriage proponents in terms of state votes. In Maryland, again, 52-48 right now the vote there. The same looking to be true in Washington State. A ballot initiative in Washington State to affirm a marriage equality bill that was passed in the legislature there is also ahead at this hour. In the great state of Maine, for the first time in the history of this issue, voters worked to put a measure on the ballot that was actually a pro-gay rights measure. It would create a same-sex marriage right in that state, and right now in Maine, that initiative is winning. In Minnesota, voters are deciding what voters are typically asked to decide on these measures, in the sense that they are asked to whether they would specifically like to ban same-sex marriage in the state constitution. And that effort in Minnesota is very close right now, with the marriage equality side, the gay rights side, just barely losing in Minnesota. We've also seen a handful of wins on the issue of marijuana tonight. A medical marijuana measure failed tonight in Arkansas, but a medical marijuana measure did get approved tonight in the state of Massachusetts. In Colorado, a measure to allow personal use of marijuana has also passed tonight. In Washington, voters tonight approved a similar measure, personal use of marijuana. However, in Oregon, a measure to legalize marijuana, that measure in Oregon is losing right now. California voters today considered a ballot question ending the death penalty. That measure is losing right now in California. In Florida tonight, voters have rejected a constitutional amendment aimed at dramatically restricting abortion rights in Florida, with 98% of precincts reporting. Look at that. The anti-abortion ballot measure in Florida is losing by double digits, by a 10-point margin. In Michigan, voters are deciding whether to repeal the controversial emergency manager law, which allows emergency managers to take over financially troubled cities. This is something both Ed Schultz and I have covered extensively over the past couple of years. With more than 2/3 of precincts reporting this hour, a majority of Michigan voters want to repeal that emergency manager law. That emergency manager law, I always thought, was the single most radical piece of legislation that was put into place, not just proposed, but put into place in a state after a Republican takeover in the 2010 election. That emergency manager law was a dramatic strengthening of previous laws of that type in that state, essentially allowing the governor to come in and overrule whoever it is you voted for at the local level, overrule your local officials. Essentially, they could step in unilaterally as a financial overseer and dissolve your whole town and sell off its assets with nobody in the town having any say over it whatsoever. But again, that appears to be being on its way to repeal in Michigan right now, with the majority of precincts reporting, although there's no definitive note on that one yet. The very excited, happy scenes that you see here are in Chicago as this crowd of Obama supporters awaits the president's victory speech tonight. These folks do not look tired.
I keep thinking, I'm looking for my daughter in there. She's somewhere in there, that crowd tonight. You know, it's interesting that you're talking about the same-sex issue. Of course, you've lived through it, and it's a big issue. It was a big negative problem politically for the Democrats just 8 years ago. Yeah. Just think about Ohio and how they really yanked down the party in that presidential election out there, thanks to Don King and, again, Karl Rove and all those machinations to use that against John Kerry in his election. But actually, it turned that election around the other way. And this time, it didn't hurt anybody.
I think that the Romney-Ryan campaign took a pretty absolutist anti-gay rights view, a view that is maybe supported by Republican Congress.
It's in their platform. It's in the platform.
It is in the platform. It is decreasingly supported by even Republican voters. And I think that there's going to come some sort of break in Republican politics where they realize on gay rights, maybe even before they realize it in some of these other demographic issues, that they are standing on shifting ground. I don't know. Steve Schmidt, let me get your take on that. This is something that you've talked about in the past. I know that you personally support same-sex marriage rights, and it's something about you've been sort of at odds with your party on this.
Well, there's more and more Republicans all the time that are coming out and endorsing marriage equality, and there's scores of them. From Vice President Cheney on down. In New Hampshire, there were more Republican votes, partly because of the size of the Republican majority in the legislature, but more Republican votes to legalize gay marriage for the first time than Democratic votes. And I thought that was an important moment. And so you have a cultural divide in the party. You see clearly in the Northeast on issues of gay equality. This is an issue where Republicans in the Northeast and in the West are out of step with evangelical Christian Republicans in the South, for example. And so the other aspect of this is generationally. We saw Mitt Romney tonight. He's almost certain to be the last baby boomer to ever be nominated by the Republican Party. There may be one more baby boomer nominee if Hillary Clinton is the Democratic nominee in 2016. But these candidates who are the future of the Republican Party, Paul Ryan, Marco Rubio, are they going to be out of step entirely with their generation over the next 10, 15, 20 years? Which is the first one of those conservatives of the future to break with the orthodoxy? I think it's crazy that we would define conservatism around the issue of gay marriage. And, you know, in my case, I'm a conservative, and my position in support of gay marriage is because of my conservatism. I want people to be married. I think that it's a stabilizing institution for society. It's good, and I think you'll see growing support for it in the Republican
Party. Did you hear Paul Ryan just the other day raving about how Barack Obama is a threat to the Judeo-Christian culture, an enemy of the West? Who is this guy, El Cid? I mean, who is this guy out defending the West? I mean, I think he's got a long way to go to catch up with you, buddy.
Before President Obama speaks, I want to get to Tamron Hall here to talk about specifically a little bit of the gender and racial dynamics that were at play tonight in this victory for the president. Tamron?
Yeah, Rachel, we knew that the president's strategy had to be not to suffer a huge loss with white voters and also maintain his momentum or his advantage with non-white. So in 2008, Obama got 43% of the white vote, a lot less than his opponent at the time, John McCain, but still we know enough to win. Well, tonight, let's take a look at the numbers. Obama's not far from his performance 4 years ago with 40% of the white vote, and he matched his performance among non-whites with 80%, the same as we saw 4 years ago. You mentioned gender. Obama also benefited from a gender gap tonight. Take a look at the numbers. We're seeing 55 to 43%, which more than made up for his 7-point loss among men. Also important for Obama was the youth vote. 60% of the young people voted for the president, down a little from 4 years ago, but still a solid group for Obama. So a lot of insight for even Republicans now to chew on. You guys were talking about the next generation, baby boomers, who will emerge as a leader within the Republican Party. Certainly they've got to think about women and Latinos, and you cannot just toss away, for example, the African-American electorate just because the candidate, of course, is African-American. So Michael Steele has hit on this. Mike Murphy, they have a lot to discuss within that party.
Tamron Hall, thank you very much for that. It's, you know, that looking at that, you were reacting audibly to the 80% of the non-white vote going to President Obama, both in 2008 and now, but the white vote declining for him from 43 to 40%.
But that's not bad, actually. I think Clinton had about 40, right? Didn't he? I mean, we're going to check that number, but I'm telling you, Barack Obama went up in 8 from before. The Democrats, I happen to be white, and I've been very ashamed in this election by the comments made by people. As much so supposedly on behalf of our race, which we don't need it, our ethnic group, stuff it was relentless throughout this campaign. And I'm so glad it was just those perpetrators and agitators that were doing it, that it didn't have a mass effect, apparently. That is such a good thing about our country. You know, we're still trying to pick the best president.
I just don't think that that's that much erosion when you consider the narrative that they had for 4 years, just so negative on him, from his birth certificate to him not
They
being
practically frisked the
American
guy.
enough. Yeah,
I mean, it's unbelievable. Get out of your car. Show me your birth certificate. Who are you? I'm the President of the United States.
I think that's a small erosion.
No, it was vicious, but I think that the country rose above it. And I think that the other thing is that they said that his base of non-whites were not going to come out and vote, and that didn't go down. And in many areas tonight, it went up.
Yeah.
So a lot of the critics on that side are left empty-handed now because the president did not lose support in his base. It came out even more. And I think that, again, he didn't play into the negativism. I mean, a lot of things that it will take a lot of us a while to get over, I think we're challenged tonight to accept it because of the president's example.
You know what's good?
I think Clinton helped him.
Let me just go, before we're getting, we think we've got a couple of minutes until the president speaks, literally a couple of minutes. Before that happens, I want to ask Gene Robinson from the Washington Post to weigh in terms of what he's expecting from the president tonight and what is important to hear from the president tonight, given the way this victory played out. Gene?
Well, we still have a divided country. That popular vote is going to be pretty close, although President Obama will have a big lead in the Electoral College. What I expect to hear is a speech that tries to set an embracing tone, that tries to reach out, I guess, across the aisle, but really across ethnic groups and across gender and across all the divisions that kind of came out in this campaign. I think, excuse me, I think it'll be an embracing speech that seeks to set a tone for going forward. Because remember, you know, the good news is that President Obama won re-election. The bad news is he still has to be president for 4 more years in a country that has huge challenges and that is so divided on so many issues. And so I expect it to be gracious. I expect it to be fairly big, not in terms of policy, but in terms of bringing us together.
Gene, you'll forgive me for quoting The Onion. Do you remember that famous Onion headline when Obama won in 2008? Black man given worst job in America. Is this job a harder job for these next 4 years than it was for these first 4 years?
Well, in some ways, because, well, look, the first 4 years were pretty tough, but here we are, the second 4 years, he's got big agenda items that he wants to do. We've got an economy that, you know, that's recovering, but that really won't ignite, and if it would ignite, that would make so many of the other tasks that much easier. But he needs cooperation. He needs a different relationship with the business community. He can't afford to have them think of him as an enemy. He needs, and here he is.